the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And today's question is: can storytelling change the world, especially when it envisions a better future? But how do we go about that? How do we get that done? Well, Lee is the perfect guest, the perfect to answer that question. He's our guest for today. Lee Schneider is a media producer with decades of experience. He started in television working for Good Morning America, Dateline NBC, Discovery Channel, and other cable networks. He is the chief strategist and lead producer at Red Cup Agency and is the artistic director at Future X Studio. His latest novel is titled Resist. It's a near future story that will inspire readers who want to protect the planet we have now and suggest a path forward through climate change. And that is why we are going to attempt to delve into storytelling today. And Lee is here to share all his stories, his insight, and of course, his wisdom with us today. Lee, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Lee, I mean, you've had a diverse career in media, a lot, with working with major networks and now running your own agencies. What has your journey from television producer to being a founder of your agency, what has that been like? But more than that, before we really get into this, what was the childhood Lee like? Did he always know that you were going into production, into media, into all of these experiences? What is the story of Lee Schneider?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that in a while. And we grew up with media around because my dad worked in television. He was a lawyer.
Mm.
So we had a TV and we had media stuff. And my dad was on the phone with people who were on TV sometimes. And I sort of had an idea that there was this thing out there that it wasn't just a box that in the back of the room, but you could do something with that. My brother and I also, we had tape recorders, reel-to-reel recorders, and we would
Right.
make little shows, and I developed my own film. And so this idea of making stuff that was media started way early on. I mean, that's something that I was doing just as a kid, really. It just seemed like something that people did,
Right.
and I always liked capturing stuff, photography and video, and did that in high school. We made Super 8 movies when you could make little Super 8 movies. So
Right.
it was, I would have to say, it was sort of in the water, if that's the right
Oh,
expression. It was just there already to play around with.
it's almost like not just in the water, but also in the blood, right?
Yeah,
Like it
in
was
the blood, in
always
the air.
in the
Yeah.
air
My
everywhere. And
yeah. My mother was a sculptor and painter, and she was,
wow,
creativity had a very high level of value in the family. So the idea
wow,
of
beautiful.
creating stuff was actually okay. It wasn't something
Wow.
that somebody else did. It was something that we could do.
Wow. And that led you to a path of working with media, working in television, being a producer, to founding your own agencies. What was that transition like? Talk to us a bit about your experience in television and being a producer of all these major networks, and how those experiences shaped you into founding your own agencies.
Another good question. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I'd have to say, people think of careers as very linear, but
Mhm.
they're actually rather loopy and spirally, and
Maybe
and
squiggly.
squiggly. I started really writing plays in New York, and I was a
Mhm.
play producer and a writer of plays way before I tried to make my first movie, except for, student films in high school. So I had experience producing, that could be done. And I originally just started writing because it was accessible to me and I could do it and I was pretty good at it. And I started at networks because I could be a fill-in guy, like um, when someone was called in sick, they could call me, and I
Right.
started writing for Good Morning America like that, and
Okay.
actually started writing for local news stations like that because I could just come in and and kind of jump in and do the job. The
Mhm.
other stuff like Dateline NBC and Discovery Network and history was really, I
Mhm.
started to get a sense of this a little longer than uh, when you write a segment for TV, even
Mhm.
now, it's pretty
Mhm.
short, 30
Right.
seconds, minute,
Mhm.
short is good. But I started doing news magazine segments and longer form pieces, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. And that I learned is pretty hard,
Right.
sustaining somebody's interest, especially when there are commercials and things breaking it up. That's
Right.
hard. But I became good at it because I started to get this through line of the story. You had to make a story, especially on
Right.
TV, that was kind of could take anything. It could take anything
Right.
you threw at it.
Mhm.
Meaning there's going to be a commercial. Maybe it's on cable or maybe it's on streaming, and there'd be 5 minutes of commercials, and then you'd come back and
Right.
people wouldn't even know, like, what are we looking at? Where are we? And we got
Right.
used to kind of rebooting and re-racking the storyline. So you had to make these sort of armored stories that could
Mhm.
take over. They could handle anything.
Yes, that's it.
That helped a lot. Because when you
Okay.
start to think, you can't let people lose the thread of the story. If they lose the thread of the story, they're in a long form piece, they're not going to make it. In a short
Right.
form piece, sure, if the story's 30 seconds, great, you can come back like a YouTube short and watch another one. But when I was working in that kind of television, the story really had to carry it. Maybe you knew the voice, maybe it was some news anchor you knew, but maybe you didn't know that person. And you basically, if you were just flipping the channels around in those days, you just had to figure out, oh, is this a story I want to watch or not? So
Right.
that was a big challenge and something we all had to do. We had to figure that
Right.
out.
Mhm. Wow, that is, I mean, that's quite the perspective that I don't think I've ever encountered, especially now you with working all these major networks. But it gives that perspective when creating the work that goes behind creating stories, behind producing stories whenever, because it's easy to just be a viewer sometimes, just kind of just watch
Hmm.
it, but knowing what the kind of work that is required behind the scenes is quite enlightening. You're, of course, one of your studios, a Future X studio, one of your agencies, and it one of its goals is it aims to amplify projects about the future of cities, climate, computing. Very, very sci-fi. I feel like in
Hmm.
its themes, right? But more, say, really like realistic applications of this kind of future. How do you envision the role of storytelling in shaping a just and positive future? And what was the inspiration behind this? Why?
Well, storytelling, we kind of have to do it, right? We're narrative animals. We tell stories. That's kind of what, sitting around the campfire, that's what people do.
Mhm.
So that's a major tool in the toolbox
Mhm.
if you want to get something across, whatever it might be.
Right.
People, they don't remember facts very well. You could put up a bunch of facts on a screen. You
Mhm.
could have someone recite a bunch of facts.
Mhm.
29% of facts are not interesting, but it's really the storytelling that
Mhm.
grabs you. It's tell me what happened to you today or whatever it might be. And
Mhm.
so that first was ingredient one. That had to happen. And then I saw that uh, not enough of those kind of stories were being told in a way that we could absorb. And by that I
Yes.
mean with a maybe a little bit of optimism, maybe with a
Interesting.
little bit of forward looking in a way that says, okay, we can do this.
Mhm.
Because as I often say, dystopia is easy. You can tell kind of a sad, difficult story about the future. And in some of those difficult stories, they are going to help you envision a better future because you look at it and go, well, I don't want that. I don't want it to be like that. I should be like this. But there's also and this is answering your question directly,
Yeah.
the role playing nature of storytelling. That if a story is successful, you want to put yourself into it, right? If you're going to be Batman, if you're going to be, Mary Poppins, if you're going to be whoever you are in that story, well,
Mhm.
the story's working because you're kind of looking around through the eyes of the character.
That's it.
And if
That's
you
it.
could tell a major problem solving story, uh, people come up a very interesting example would be the three body problem, which is
Yes.
a three-part story. It's on Netflix now
Mhm. Mhm.
about an alien invasion. That's a pretty
Yes.
big problem. But the people in those three books, they solve that problem. And
Mhm.
you could put yourself, there are so many characters in there, but you could pick a character and get the point of view of that character, kind of look through their periscope and
Mhm.
understand how that problem might be solved. And I
Mhm.
think that works, from the time of the ancient Greeks up to now. The
Right.
medium doesn't matter. It could
Mhm.
be digital, it could be analog, it could be pictures, it could be words, it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter. As long as you can get people inside that story and envisioning themselves in the story, well, then you have a role model, good or
Right.
bad.
I
And I
love
think
that.
that's the key to it. That's kind of how it works. Maybe someone will come up with a better way, some way, but for all the changes in our world, people are basically the same about that aspect of themselves.
I I love that. I love you contrasted dystopia. I love how you said dystopia is easy. I mean, there's so many stories out there, right? Like dystopian
Mm.
YA. It's really it's an easy story to tell. I love how you said that. Let's not let's take a different path. Let's talk about a bit of like optimism of the future. How are we solving future problems? How do we envision a positive future, so to speak? I think these stories are meant to be. I love how you said we have to tell stories. It's
Mm.
in our nature. So why not tell more positive stories that help us or position us in a better future, or to have a better future, to inspire, a better future? Is it all? Is it all limited to fiction story, Lee? And what medium
Mm.
in particular are you particularly favoring, so to speak?
Well, right now, I kind of split my time between nonfiction podcasts,
Mhm.
which are storytelling still, but they're interviews, kind of
Of
like
course,
this,
yes.
and
Mhm.
fiction, and I think that fiction right now,
Mhm.
it has a power to take us into another world, another
Yes,
place,
I love
and
it.
it can push the point a little bit, not without being preachy,
Mhm.
without
Mhm.
hammering people on the head with it, because that doesn't work. I think the issue with optimism and forward-looking optimism is that
Mhm.
we're facing some really complex problems in the world, and we can't just flip a switch and hope that it's going to fix the problem, because the issues, and here things get complicated, but the issues are systemic. There's, if we're going to be burning fossil fuels, there's a problem. If you look at something like AI, and AI is pretty marvelous, and AI requires a lot of power, requires a
Yes,
lot of computing power, requires a
yes,
lot of electricity and even water. If you
yes.
want to have a lot of AI, you're going to need a lot of that. And if you're
Mhm.
making that power through burning stuff,
Mhm.
it's not so good. If we ask
Mhm.
the AI would say, that's not a good idea. You
Mhm.
should come up with another way. So I
Right.
think the reason that the world isn't crazy with positive climate stories is we're still
Mhm.
feeling our way through the role model that
Right.
would make that doable for people, would
Mhm.
make that workable. I consider that part of my job, and part of, did I put, yeah, Robin Sloan's book, Moonbound. Robin Sloan's a very interesting
Oh,
novelist. This is his latest book, and he is
wow.
a kind of a professional optimist. He's a fiction writer, but he believes in writing these optimistic role models
I
for
love
us
that.
to read and enjoy. So there are some in the past, like Ursula Le Guin, who is an
Yeah,
amazing,
Ursula. Mhm.
difficult, complicated, basically optimistic person. The Left Hand of
Mhm.
Darkness is an amazing book about
Yes.
solving huge planetary problems. And it requires a kind of a courage, to take on these big issues and build a story that people want to check out. that
Yes,
people want to get into. It's not enough
I
to
love
just
that.
kind of tell the story. You have to tell the story that people want to hear or read.
I
That's a
love that.
challenge.
That is, of course, a challenge because it's so much easier. Again, some of these new shows today that are coming out, it always features this like hugely, this antagonist that is like, that's people that that is an somewhat interesting antagonist, like with a sympathetic backstory that people can relate to, but still hugely morally corrupt, right? And there's a rise of that type of characters and shows that are centric to that type of characters because it gets people going, it gets people more interested when that type of character is out there. And like you said, it's become such an easy show, it's become such an easy character or concept to make today. It's a
Hmm.
story that I feel that just amplifies hate instead of amplifying positivism, right? And it's
Yeah.
far more challenging to create role models in a future that is, that hasn't happened, and envisioning a future that might happen, but how do we solve it in a positive way? Wow, I really want to get deeper into that whole fiction aspect because I really,
Hmm.
really love fiction, and especially the
Hmm.
sci-fi aspects of it. But I want to talk about your agency, Red Cup Agency. You mentioned this
Hmm.
earlier that you split your time with non-fiction podcasts, and you specialize in creating podcasts from scratch over at Red Cup Agency. Can you
Hmm.
share an example of a podcast project that you were particularly proud of, one that stands out, and how do you feel it has made an impact in the realm of nonfiction future envisioning positivity? Wow, I can't believe you put that together, but talk to us a
You
bit
put
about
that.
that.
Yeah. Well, there's one I'm working on now, which I really love. It's
Mhm,
for glo.com.
mhm,
And a few years ago, they contacted me and said, we want to do a podcast about what we do. And Glow is a online portal for wellness and health and yoga and Pilates and meditation, all kinds of things. And they said, we have a few ideas. We have some ideas for guests. Talk about it. And that's
mhm,
one of my favorite things to do. We have some ideas. You have some ideas. I have some ideas.
mhm,
Who's the host? Who do we interview?
mhm,
How does it take place? Does it take place on something like Riverside? Do we go into a studio?
mhm.
And we gradually, it takes about 4 or 5 episodes for a podcast to kind of hit its stride, so we know
Right.
what we're doing. And we're on episode 82 now,
Wow, very
and
cool.
which is great, and it's all these some of the episodes are very simple, like how to be happy. Some of
Mhm,
them are into the more complicated stuff of how to do yoga and breathing. What's interesting about this podcast is the audience who listens and likes it loves, and this never ceases to amaze me, they love the really complicated, in the weeds, philosophical discussion of what yoga does and
wow,
how you do
interesting.
yoga. And we've done some interviews with sleep experts and neurologists and scientists and astrologers. And, you do 82 episodes, you do a lot of topics.
Yeah,
And the more detailed, it's kind of the
mhm,
beauty of the long form podcast, right? The more
right.
detailed, the deeper it goes.
Mhm,
People like long, detail, complicated. They're looking for that in
right,
this
right.
particular show. There was another one that I loved, did 2 seasons of, called Same, Same, But Tech. And it was about explaining tech concepts. And it evolved, it changed as we went. Season one leaned into the interview, like, let's talk about someone, what does in the cloud mean, let's talk about
Right.
someone who explains that.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
evolved into a narrative podcast where we recreated the sounds and places. So if someone was talking about being the first person on a Russian commercial space flight, we had the
oh,
countdown in Russian. We had the sounds of the ship, what does a liftoff sound like? And that was fun because it brought me back to my earlier news days where,
mhm,
we need footage of a rocket taking off, but it should be the right one. Uh,
Mm,
and that's something that happens a lot in news. When I worked
wow.
for the History Channel,
Right.
I do a segment about the V2 bomb
Yeah.
or a U.
Right.
And
Right.
people would write in and say, that's not the right engine sound for that aircraft. And sometimes they were right. A lot of times they were wrong. But the point is, there are people who care about all those
Yes.
details. And
Hmm.
getting all those details right is
Hmm.
as easily as complicated as getting all the things about yogic philosophy right.
I
There's
love that.
it's the layers, and the complexity,
Yes.
and that's what's fun about it. You can
Yes.
and podcasts, as you know, go on several levels. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people are going to listen to this podcast word for word. People are going to watch. Maybe if there's a transcript, they're going to read the transcript. But people may
Yes.
also be jogging when they're listening to it, or they may be doing the dishes, or they may be, who knows what they're doing. And
Right.
podcasts have to live on several levels, really. You don't really know how they're being consumed. And I find that a fascinating challenge. I know this is a long answer, but
But
it's an interesting topic.
yeah, of course, it is.
You when we mix these podcasts, for the end, we listen to it on a terrible speaker, we listen to it on a beautiful speaker, we listen to it with good headphones, we listen to it with bad headphones. I used to have an audio mixer who worked for me that said, I have to take this out in the car. I'm going to drive around with it. Can't give it to you yet. I'm going to drive around and listen to it in the car because I want to be sure it sounds okay. And
Wow.
that's wonderful stuff, because
Mhm.
you can mix something with all these low bass notes or super high stuff, and people aren't going to hear that in the car, or they're certainly not going to hear it doing the dishes. So that's what becomes fascinating about this, the layers that you can bring to it just to make it good, just
Yes.
it
Yeah.
doesn't, I'm not even talking like amazingly good, just
Yes. Yes.
solid. And that's
Exactly.
fun.
Exactly.
I like that part of it.
I love how you pointed out a few things. You pointed out the technical aspect of it, which is, of course, very, very interesting, very, very fun to put together. But also, I love that you talked about the niches, right? It's like really about
Hmm.
touching into those niches, like yoga. I mean, yoga. Really, there's a dime a dozen. Like there's people talk about yoga everywhere, but and it's like you have these people who have a surface level understanding of yoga, but because of the podcast and the community that you're tapping into, you get to find these people who are really into yoga, who are really into the
Right.
whole technicalities of it, and the philosophies and the details. You're really passionate about it, and it's not just yoga. We're talking other niches, really, really
Hmm.
niche industries, topics, and concepts that we would normally not have a deeper understanding of if it weren't for the say what the opportunity that or the doors that podcasting offers and
Hmm.
that opens up for us. And we are mutual in this understanding that podcast
Hmm.
is very, very interesting. It's very fun to do, especially the type of people that you meet. And of course, I'm quite excited about meeting you as well, Lee. Thank you for coming on again. Your latest novel, now you're a producer. Apart from
Hmm.
being a producer, a storyteller, your latest novel, Resist, is a near future story. It encourages readers to take action against climate change. What was the inspiration behind this book, and what message do you hope readers take away from it?
Well, I had these experiences. I live in Southern California,
Mm.
and the weather was always great, and it was always pleasant, and that was what California was. I moved here from New York a while ago, and we started having fires. Not even in our neighborhood, but near enough
Whoa.
so the air wasn't breathable outside, and it got very hot or it got very
Whoa.
rainy, and I started to realize, this is climate change. This isn't just a weird
Exactly.
weather day. This is
Exactly.
this is it. And I had these notes. Writers always have notes, and I had tons of notes on a book about someone who was dealing with a changed world that included AI and kind of an AI controller that was
Right.
controlling the climate. There were just a bunch of notes, diagrams and stuff in a notebook. And I have, like every other person who writes novels, I have I think, three other books that are just laying around, in a drawer, that I wrote the whole book and then I looked
Wow.
at it and said, that's not going to work. I don't think that presses the right button. Or, if I can't finish reading it, sorry, no one's going to finish reading it. And I even wrote a few nonfiction books, which I published and
Wow.
had people look at. But this suddenly, because I was living it, because it was hard to breathe, literally, because the weather was going weird, and I started to investigate that and see what that was, I realized this is the defining existential crisis of our time.
Mhm.
Every other problem is a big racial inequality, economic inequality. These are all big problems. But if we can't solve climate issues, there's not going to be a planet, or it's not going to be a very livable planet. And
Right.
it's kind of went to the top of my list. All right, how can I write a story that, like I said before, gives you a role model, gives you
Okay.
someone who is interesting enough so you want to follow their trials and tribulations as they try to work this out.
Okay.
It's going to take three books to do it. I've written the first two and I'm working on the third now because I wanted to show somebody who maybe didn't get it at first. I didn't want
Right.
to start with propaganda. I wanted to
Of course.
start with a main character who was from the tech world, who, didn't, maybe thought that the science behind the climate stuff was real, but it wouldn't really affect her. But then it starts to affect her. And then, uh, the whole AI control of society starts to affect her. And
Wow.
that's basically the first book, as she figures out, meaning this character, I'm going to be the person to need to step up and do something about this.
Right.
And then the
Right.
second book, called Resist, she's dealing with how do you do that? How do you fight back against a planetary power that in this case is an AI that controls the climate? How do you do something about that?
Right.
So she has to work through all that. And the third book, which, as I said, I'm about 20-ish thousand words through,
Okay. Okay.
is going to be about it's called Liberation, and it's about that optimistic thing that we were talking about. Because the reason there are three books is I wanted to earn the reader's belief in optimism. I didn't want to say,
Interesting.
"Hey, got a great idea, let's solve all these problems, done."
Mhm.
I knew that wouldn't work. I knew I had to bring the reader and my main characters along on a journey, hence three books. Plus, in science fiction, you often have to write, I learned.
Okay. Well, okay. That is very interesting. You have a wow, you have the goal in mind. You have this complete
Mhm.
story, so to speak. But I love how you structured it. You didn't want to go with propaganda right away. Like you said, you wanted to build main characters first. You want to build their motivations first. Wanted to build why they would feel affected by these things. And I love how you relate
Mhm.
it to the current time. I love that. I love that it's just very relatable. It's something people can easily put their place into those characters, into the story. I love it. I love it, Lee. Very, very, inspiring and creative stuff. And you've worked a lot of variety of topics through your media
Mhm.
production, through your, yeah, I mean, climate education as what was the main driving force in your
Mhm.
interest in these diverse topics, and how do you choose projects to take on when really your main motivation when it
That's
comes
a,
to truly
I have
telling
to speak to an
stories?
intangible. Some people talk about when I know it's right, or I feel this buzz,
Yes.
or something like that. And it's kind of like that for me. I
Mhm.
know I've tried to work on
Mhm.
projects that were just
Mhm.
up, just got to do it for the money. I'm not going to name
Wow.
names or clients, just got to do it for the money. This
Mhm.
won't be that interesting. And,
Mhm.
when you're starting
Mhm.
out, sure, you definitely have to. One
Mhm.
thing, you need the practice of producing large scale projects. And for another, maybe the cash flow is an issue. So you got to do it. But I find now
Mhm.
I get excited by things that on one level just are complex, level might give us a shot at a better world in some way. So I tend to work on things that are educational or about education, about leadership, I like things that are about health and wellness, things that improve the human, be better people.
Mhm.
And that's kind of my filter. I mean, if someone comes along and says,
Interesting.
well, I can't name names because I don't want to get in trouble, but if someone comes along and says something that's like, we're all about the money here, we're going to all make $1 million, we're all going to get rich off this project. Well, maybe we will, and maybe that's a good reason to do it. But if that's the only reason, I'm not
Mhm.
sure I'm willing to go with that as the only reason because, most startups don't
See.
make it. And when people pitch me on, hey, I have a great idea for a startup, will you do the podcast for it? I got to listen carefully. Is it worth trying? Am I going to go on their journey with them? Because,
Mhm.
you really, it's like producing a movie. You're very involved with your folks doing these projects for months and months. So they have to like me and I have to like them. I guess that's another factor. Do we like each other? When we do the initial meet and greet, like, do I like you? Do
Mhm.
you like me? All of that stuff is very real.
Of course, of course.
Hmm.
Of course, and especially when you're telling stories, right? You can't really tell a story of something that you're not
Yeah.
interested in. It not doesn't really kind of light that fire in you, you know. And these stories, whether or not it's nonfiction or a podcast or a production, it has to be a story that you're interested in, so you're able to tell the story effectively. And again, I love how it's always focused on positivity, focus on a better
Yeah.
future, optimism for the
Yeah.
future. We definitely need more of that today. Don't you agree, Lee? I mean, it's so crucial right now. Lee, I love it. I think we were able to cover both aspects of what you do. I love that we were able to cover also all the media, and all the mediums that you are also involving yourself in. Lee, I'd love to give you this opportunity. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you? Are you on any of the socials?
Sure.
Where can
Well,
we learn
start with
more?
if you go to
Lee, and of course, where can we find your book?
futurex.studio, the books are there. The two books are listed for there, and I'm running a
Mhm.
special, but you can buy it direct from me for a bit less. If you search my name, Lee Schneider, on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, on .org, I'll come up because the books will come up. For podcast production and all the production stuff, Red
Mhm.
Cup Agency, like a red cup
Interesting.
agency.com, has all the information. I'm on LinkedIn too. And social's funny. I use the handle like documentary guy, because there are Lee Schneiders out there. So I've always stuck with that. So on LinkedIn, I'm docu guy. On Mastodon and Blue Sky, I'm docu guy. On micro.blog, I think I use my own name. But I don't. I'm still on
Right.
Twitter. I'm not really using it anymore. Most of my social media stuff is Mastodon and Blue Sky now. That thing, yeah.
All right. Fantastic. I love that you
I'll
call it
never
Twitter. And
not call it Twitter.
yes,
I can.
that thing, whatever that was. But
I can't
I
do it.
will never not call it beer. It's not. It's just it doesn't make sense. I agree in there, Lee. And I love that you're on Mastodon. I invite our audience and listeners, try out Mastodon, give Lee a follow, and check out his book as well. I'm very interested. Of course, I'd probably love to have grab a copy myself. Of course, both your books are also available. All your books are available on the site. And again, Lee,
Cool.
I love it. I love that. I love I'm really into sci-fi. I'm not, of course, I'm not that big of a information on the information side of it and all that, but I'm always interested. I'm always interested, of course, in the positivity side of things. I'm done with the doomsday. Please give me more optimism for the world. I want to live longer in this future. I want to have a bright future ahead of us. And I love that you are
Thank you so
bringing
much. It's
voice
really been
into
a
all of this.
pleasure
Lee,
to
thank
talk
you
to you
so much
today.
for coming on the show. I truly appreciate it. Fantastic. And Lee, I enjoyed this. All our audience and listeners out there, I hope you guys enjoyed this as well. And you took as much value as as I did. And again, check out Lee, check out what he does. And thank you for watching the episode.
Cool.
We will see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.